Hello everyone, it is Peter Sam the Narrow Gauge Engine here. Welcome to ranking every Season 2 episode of Thomas and Friends Worst to Best. Season 2 is more mediocre than Season 1 was. It didn't have low episodes like Percy Runs Away, but then again it didn't really have the high episodes like Flying Kipper. It just sort of exists. Anyway, let's get on to number 26. Now, in number 26 is Better Late Than Never. This is just Thomas being a dick for like 4.5 minutes. I don't think there's any real clear story or plot to this episode. Honestly, if you're a newcomer to the Thomas series, you might want to just skip this one out. It doesn't really add anything. So, now let's move on to number 25. In number 25 is Percy and the Signal. It's a nice trick that Gordon and James play on Percy, but apart from that, what really happens? It's like Percy Runs Away from Season 1, and we all know how I feel about that one. So let's shuffle over to number 24. Now, in number 24 is The Runaway. This is just basically Old Iron, but with Harold. The chase sequence is nice, which is why I gave it a bit of leverage, but apart from that, this is just Old Iron. You'll see this happening with Harold. He's just like filling in for different characters. Here it's Edward, and then when we get to Percy and Harold in a bit, you'll see that he's actually like kind of the Bertie of that episode. Anyway, let's move on to number 23. Now, in number 23 is Wrong Road. I think half of Season 2 is just Gordon getting his comeuppance, and this episode is no different. Except this one is just a lot more bland. He just gets teased by Bill and Ben. That's great. I mean, great. Apart from that, pretty basic episode. Didn't mind it really. Let's go to number 22. Now, in number 22 is probably the most bland episode of Season 2. It's The Deputation. It's a nice ending to Donald and Douglas's sort of story arc, but it's just a bit bland. I mean, it's fine saying deputation wrong once, but when you get to like the 50th time, it's not funny anymore. Anyway, let's move on to number 21. Now, in number 21, it might shock some of you, most of you probably, it's Duck Takes Charge. I'm just going to say it, I don't really mind Duck. I don't like him, I don't dislike him. He's just a bit in the middle for me. I'm more of an Oliver guy myself. He has more of a backstory, he has more of a character and a drive. But anyway, in this episode, we see Duck battling the big engines, kind of amusing, kind of, yeah. I just lack to find reasons to like it. Let's move on to number 20 then. For the number 20 spot, it is Cows. I think this was better watching as a child, because now in my current form, I find this episode boring. The only difference between this episode and all the other episodes that Gordon gets paid out in Season 2 is that Henry's along for the ride as well. But yeah, just an in-between episode for me. It's like a guilty pleasure episode. So let's move on to 19. In number 19 is Saved from Scrap. I like Trevor. He has a nice, he's just sort of vintage, and he has a nice look about him. It's not just that though. I think Edward really shows his inner kindness and personality in this episode, which you gotta give him credit for. And later on you'll see that I think Edward has some of the best episodes in this season. I think this is really just Edward's season. Anyway, let's go to number 18. Now, in number 18 is Woolly Bear. I think this is just 4.5 minutes of Percy being taken the mick out of. I mean, he gets dumped in treacle and then he gets hay stuck to him, and it's not very fortunate for him. It's still funny, nonetheless. Don't get me wrong, I love it, but you know, poor Percy, man. Apart from that, really, I just think it's a basic nothing really happens episode. Let's move on to number 17. In number 17, we have Percy and Harold. It's always nice to see an episode where there's a race in it, but this just feels awfully similar to Thomas and Bertie. This is the thing with Harold. He just kind of replaces characters in episodes and makes them his own. It also doesn't help that I don't like Harold. I just think he's a bit of a dick. Anyway, let's go to number 16. So in number 16 is Thomas, Percy and the Coal. I really like the crashes in this episode. They're great. Now, while I don't like Thomas and Percy arguing, I think that the episode shows that their friendship will endure. Their friendship is stronger than anything that can be thrown at them. And I think that was the point that Britt Allcroft and Reverend Audrey were trying to portray. Anyway, let's go to number 15. Now, in number 15 is Brake Van. Again, the crashes in this episode, really good. And if Douglas hadn't smashed Dominic to pieces, then maybe he would have been a better villain. This episode also shows the loyalty that Donald and Douglas have to one another. And I just think, all around, it's pretty good. But let's move on to number 14. So, in number 14 is Thomas and Trevor. Now, you might be sort of confused as to why an episode like this is so high. Well, I mean, the writers are making use of Trevor again, which is always good. And I think the real reason why this is so high is nostalgia. That scene when Trevor is clearing the logs from the harbour, it just really resonates with me. So I think that's why I put it at number 14. But now let's move on to number 13. So in number 13, we have Bertie's chase. If any episode in the Thomas franchise showed that Bertie is not one-dimensional, it would have to be this one. In this episode, we see that Bertie's not just about racing. He's also a hard worker as well, because he's trying to get those passengers onto Edward's train. But, apart from that, it's a pretty good episode, I feel, But let's move on to number 12. In number 12 is The Ghost Train. If you'll watch my top 10 Thomas themes episode, you'll know that I think the theme in this is really unnerving. It's just a bit let down-ish that the episode wasn't as scary. I like everything about this episode, apart from the scare factor. I get it's a show for kids and everything, but I mean, you could have made it a bit more scary. You could have had an actual ghost appear beside Percy or something. But yeah, very solid episode for me. So let's move on to number 11. Now, in number 11 is Daisy. Daisy is a perfect example of why you shouldn't be snobbish. Her care for herself gets in the way of her work, and I think that's a really good dynamic to have. She's one of those characters that you love to hate. Just an all-around great character, and an amusing episode as well, especially with Percy and Toby running around trying to comfort the coaches after Daisy insults them. Anyway, let's move to our top 10. But before we get there, could you do us a favour? Drop a like, drop a subscribe, add a comment. Any view helps. I love you all. Thank you for making it this far, putting up with my annoying voice. I know, irritating. But let's shuffle over to number 10. In 10th place is Percy's Predicament. I mainly like this episode because of the crash. And what a creative crash that is, and it's based off a true event. It may be a carbon copy of Percy Takes the Plunge, but I don't think that makes it bad by any stretch of the imagination. I just love this episode, so let's go on to number 9. Now, next up in number 9 is Pop Goes the Diesel. I love this episode because it's 4.5 minutes of Diesel being mocked and humiliated. It's sort of Diesel's drive in the next episode that we see him, which is Dirty Work. And plus, just to add the cherry on the cake, the narration in this episode is just beautiful. Plus, I just think Diesel's a pretty good villain in general. So let's shuffle over to number 8. Now, in number 8 is A Close Shave. Everything about this episode is good. From Duck's crash to the barber putting shaving cream on Duck's face. But there's one thing about this episode that I don't like. It's just the disregard of Diesel. It's like, oh yeah, Diesel, oh yeah, we chucked him. I would have liked to seen a scene where Diesel is kicked out the sheds, something, anything. But instead we just get the Fat Controller just saying, oh, he left, he's gone now, you can come back. But yeah, apart from that, a really great episode. Let's move on to number 7. Now, in number 7 is Thomas Comes to Breakfast. The crash in this episode is beautiful, very inventive. And I love the fact that it's a careless cleaner that causes Thomas to move, not Thomas himself. It's just an episode where Thomas gets shown up, and yeah, it's really cool. So let's move on to number 6. So in number 6 is Percy Takes the Plunge. This episode is just so class. I actually think that this episode is better than Down the Mine, which is a similar episode to that. This is Down the Mine, but with Percy, and much more improved. Everything from the harbour to like the trucks pushing Percy, it's all good. It's just that the next 5 episodes beat it out. Speaking of 5, let's move on to the top 5. So in 5th place is the Diesel. Bill and Ben have got to be some of my favourite characters, and this episode is why. The twins confusing Boko is just genius. Boko is also a pretty cool character. He's pretty chill. I wish we'd see him more, but you know, it is what it is. But now let's move on to number 4. So in number 4 is Thomas and the Missing Christmas Tree. Let's see how many people we can piss off with that opinion. This is such an improvement upon season 1's Christmas episode. The ending is better, you know, with everyone gathering around and the giant Christmas tree and Harold, and those stupid Santa hats are just hilarious. Thomas getting stuck in a snowdrift, while it's something we've seen before, I mean, let's be honest, it was better in this episode. There's so many more good things I could list about this episode, but let's just move on to number 3 for the sake of time. Now, in our 3rd spot is Dirty Work. This is the point that shows us why Diesel is the villain. For me, anyway. In Pop Goes the Diesel, he was just arrogant and blind to his own flaws. But this is the episode that brings us the reason why he's so evil. Also, it's the last appearance of Diesel, so not too great about that. We have to wait like 5 more seasons to see him. But anyway, let's go to number 2. Now, in number 2 is Edward's exploit. You gotta hand it to Edward. Despite his crank pins being broke, and the weather, the wind and the rain against him, Edward still manages to get through it and get his passengers to safety. That is what really draws me into this episode. Edward's dedication to his work, as well as his selflessness. But I think there's just one other episode that shows this better, and that is in the number 1 spot. And finally, to cap this all off, in number 1, you knew this was coming, it's Old Iron. There are 2 things that draw me particularly to this episode. One is that chase scene. It's beautiful. I could watch that for hours and still be entertained. But the second thing is, again, Edward's determination. He is going to save James no matter what. And he does, because he was determined. If I could recommend any episode to watch that's in season 1 or season 2, it's got to be Old Iron, because Edward is a wise character and you can learn from him in this episode. Well, anyway, thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe if you feel like it. Every little helps, as Tesco says apparently. And I'll see you in my next upload. See you later.